Hi, my name is Sheena Wethington, and this module for parents and guardians will review the Kentucky Alternate Assessment Participation Guidelines documentation form and discuss what each criterion included in the guidelines means and how you as the parent or guardian can contribute information about your student because the Admissions and Release Committee, or the ARC, must ask for parent input regarding each criterion and the student's skills in the home and community. If you have not already, please feel free to print out a copy of the participation guidelines provided on the participation guidance page of the Kentucky Department of Education website, along with the module, in order to follow along with the actual form that will be used in the ARC meeting. By the end of this module, you will better understand who is eligible for alternate assessments, the participation guidelines that the Admission and Release Committee, also known as the ARC or Individual Education Program, IEP, team must use and document to determine eligibility to participate, and the additional factors in the decision-making process. How you, as the parent or guardian, can contribute to determining the best way for your student to participate in state assessments. The alternate assessment is a state assessment program developed for students with significant cognitive disabilities who are unable to show their knowledge through regular state assessment. Only students with the most significant cognitive disabilities are eligible to participate in the alternate assessment. Team members, including yourself, use the participation guidelines to discuss all the information needed and make the best decision for your student. As outlined in the Kentucky Alternate Assessment Participation Guidelines documentation form, students in Kentucky with the most significant cognitive disabilities must meet the following definition. Students must meet eligibility criterion in one or more of the existing categories of disabilities under IDEA. Those would include intellectual disabilities, autism, multiple disabilities. They must have a cognitive and adaptive behavior functioning, preventing them from attaining grade level achievement standards, even with program modifications and accommodations. The student must require extensive individual instruction across multiple settings to access and make progress in the Kentucky academic standards and to maintain, generalize, and demonstrate learning. To meet the definition of a student with a significant cognitive disability, the student's significant cognitive disability must not be primarily the result of excessive or extended absences, a disability related to visual or auditory disabilities, emotional behavior disabilities, specific learning disabilities, or speech or language impairment. It may not be due to the student's native language, social, cultural, or economic differences. It may not be primarily the result of a student being identified as an English learner, or EL. It may not be due to predetermined poor performance on the grade level assessment. It may not be because the student displays disruptive behaviors or experiences emotional distress during testing. It cannot be primarily due to an administrator decision, and it may not be primarily due to the student's educational environment or instructional setting. If a student who is an English learner or EL is found to be eligible to participate in the alternate Kentucky Summative Assessment, or AKSA, the EL student will be or already is participating in the alternate access, which is the English Language Proficiency Assessment. The federal law requires states to define students with the most significant cognitive disabilities and establish guidelines associated with ARC decisions on whether students will be assessed based on alternate academic achievement standards. The KDE's participation guideline form outlines steps that an ARC should take in determining whether participating in the alternate assessment is appropriate for a student. This process includes A, reviewing student records and important information across multiple school years and settings, for example, school, home, or community, and B, determining whether the student meets all the criteria for participating in the alternate assessment as outlined in this format. Parents and guardians are important members of the ARC and will provide information and data to assist the ARC in completing the form during the meeting. The ARC will use these guidelines to pull together the data and observations about the student to paint a full picture of the student. They will then use this information to determine the student's current levels of communication and how best they can show their knowledge. Information provided by all team members, including parents or guardians, is needed in order to use the participation guidelines to make an informed decision regarding the best assessment for the student. Parents and guardians will provide important information regarding the student's functioning across multiple settings outside of the school. Now we'll review what each criteria included in the guidelines means and how you can contribute information about your student and what role is as a parent or guardian in completing the guidelines. If you have not already, please feel free to print out a copy of the participation guidelines provided on the participation guidance page of the Kentucky Department of Education website to follow along with the actual form that will be used in the ARC meeting. The link is provided here. When discussing Criterion 1, the team will talk about the student's disabilities and the contents of the student's IEP. The information provided in the IEP should include the most up-to-date information and levels of performance of your student. It's important that the IEP have the most current data for your student so that they can make the best decision. As a parent or guardian, you will want to provide the most current information about the student, if different than what is provided. Participation in an alternate assessment is determined on a case-by-case basis, but is only for students with the most significant cognitive disability. When discussing Criterion 2, the team will talk about the student's current level of cognitive functioning and adaptive behavior. The next slides will discuss what cognitive functioning and adaptive behavior mean so that you as the parent or guardian can contribute information and data to support answering this criteria. The Kentucky definition of a student with the most significant cognitive disability was described earlier in the module. A student with a significant cognitive disability is a student with an intellectual disability that requires extensive and intensive support across multiple settings. To clarify what a student has a significant cognitive disability and meets the requirements of the definition, the next slide will show you examples of some students. One student who receives extensive and intensive support and one who does not. Again, as a member of the ARC, you, the parent or guardian, will want to share how the student is able to maintain and generalize the skills in settings outside of the home. You will also need to share with the ARC whether you agree or disagree with the decision as to whether the student meets the criterion for having a significant cognitive disability. Here we have a 16-year-old student with an IEP. When given the same grade level academic standard as his same age peers, the student would be provided an adapted assignment and the supports above. These supports are not temporary and are needed for him to access the curriculum. The student requires substantially adapted materials and more individualized methods of accessing the information and showing his knowledge. These supports are extensive and intensive as compared to his same age peers. The student's cognitive functioning level is sustainably below his same age peers, and he requires substantial supports daily to achieve gains in the grade and age-appropriate curriculum. For example, when the student participates in reading activities, he requires adapted reading materials each time along with prompting to a point at picture cards. As the parent or guardian, providing to the ARC what types of extensive instruction and intensive accommodations or modifications you must make for the student in the home and community settings will help the ARC in determining if the student meets this criteria. After seeing those examples, think about your student's current level of cognitive functioning. While the school team may be able to explain how this impacts your students' learning at school, you are the expert on how it impacts them at home and in the community. When discussing if your student has a significant cognitive disability, you will need to share with the ARC some examples of how their cognitive functioning impacts them in their home, community, or when completing independent tasks. For example, what is your student able to do at home independently? What support do you have to provide to your student for them to participate and function in your home? With family and friends or around town, such as shopping, sporting events, you can give them examples of how you support your students on a specific task. What do you do when they can't do it on their own? Adaptive behavior is a collection of skills that all people need to function in daily lives. Those skills include conceptual, social, practical, and communication. As the parent or guardian, you will be asked to provide information regarding your student's adaptive behavior. The next slides give examples of adaptive behavior to assist you in knowing what to share with the ARC. Here's an example of 4 domains of adaptive skills. Conceptual skills means things like the ability to read and write, stay on task, and the understanding of money and time. Social skills includes things like interacting with others, working well in a group, making and keeping friends, and they can cooperate with rules and laws. Practical skills will include things like personal hygiene care, homemaking skills, and community living and work skills. Communication skills includes things like being able to make your needs and wants known through whatever form of communication you use. The ability to listen and react to communication with others. As the parent or guardian, you will want to share information with the ARC regarding your student's current adaptive skills in multiple settings. Here is some adaptive information for our student from the earlier example. This summary is based on teacher and parent or guardian interviews. This information would be shared with the ARC. As you can see, the ARC discusses the student's current adaptive behavior scores based on assessments which would be provided by the teacher. Same-age peers typically have adaptive scores around 100, and the student scored 40. They also discuss his progress data regarding how he performs in the home and community settings. This information is shared by the parents or guardians. The information you share with the ARC regarding the student's current level of adaptive skills in all areas will help the ARC to determine if the student has significant adaptive behaviors that meet criteria 2. As you can see, the ARC members describe the student as a student who has significant needs related to his current adaptive skills. After seeing those examples, think about your student's current level of adaptive functioning. While the school team may be able to explain how this impacts your students' learning at school, again, you are the expert on how it impacts them at home and in the community. When discussing if your student has significant adaptive behavior needs, share what your student is able to do at home, with friends and family, or around town. What support do you have to provide to your student in order for them to participate and function in those settings? Give examples of any support you have to provide your student. What do you do when they can't do it on their own? As outlined in the federal law, when discussing criterion 3 of the guidelines, the team will talk about the student's need for an extensive, direct, individualized instruction, accommodations, and modifications. The next slides will break down and discuss what some of the extensive instructions and accommodations may be to help you as the member of the ARC understand what the ARC will be discussing and how they will be making the decision as to whether the student meets criteria 3. Direct instruction is when a student is provided repeated instructions in smaller steps, with more review, feedback, and independent practice. Extensive, direct, individualized instruction means instruction repeated frequently with substantial supports that are not temporary, and the student is provided with significantly adaptive materials. Significantly adapted materials may include things such as significantly shortening the length of the reading passages or using raised dots and modeling when identifying a matching number in math. As a parent or guardian, you may be able to inform the ARC of extensive direct instructions you have to provide your student in the home. As Criteria 3 states, a student must require intensive accommodations and modifications. So what are accommodations? Accommodations change how a student learns the material. An accommodation does not alter what the student is expected to learn. An accommodation makes learning accessible to the student and allows the student to demonstrate what he or she knows. A modification is different from an accommodation in that a modification changes what a student is taught or expected to learn. A modification does not alter content knowledge expectations as well as assessment administration practices. Intensive accommodations and modifications would be when students require multiple and frequent accommodations and modifications in order to have access to the curriculum and be able to appropriately show what they know. This is a list of some, not an exhaustive list, intensive accommodations that may be provided for a student based on their individual needs. Here are a few examples of intensive modifications that may be used with students who have a significant cognitive and adaptive disability. Often, these students will require multiple intensive modifications in order to have access to the curriculum and be able to appropriately show what they know. Criterion 3 of the guidelines also requires that the student needs extensive direct instruction and intensive accommodations and modifications to access the curriculum in order to maintain, generalize, and demonstrate learning across multiple settings. This means the ARC is trying to determine if the student can apply skills that they have learned in new situations, such as within different classes, at home, at a job, and in the community, with different people and a variety of materials. After seeing the examples of direct instruction and intensive accommodations and modifications, think about your student's current needs. While the school team may be able to explain the student's needs in these areas, again, you are the expert on your student and their current needs and how it impacts them at home and in the community. Share what supports, either modifying tasks, accommodating them, you have to provide to your student in order for them to participate and function in those settings. For example, are there any tasks at home that you have to repeatedly help them with by breaking it down into smaller steps? Criterion 4 is what is considered the exclusionary factors. The ARC will discuss the information listed. A student's participation in the alternate state assessment cannot be determined by any of these special factors. As the parent or guardian, you will want to review the information the ARC discusses and provide any input regarding any of the factors in order to assist the ARC in making the decision as to whether the student meets Criterion 4. Additional items the ARC must address if the ARC is discussing alternate assessment participation are listed on the form. The Parent Guide. Alternate Kentucky summative assessment may be provided to you before or during the meeting. You may take the opportunity to ask questions before or during the meeting. Some parents take the opportunity to ask questions before the meeting regarding the Parent Guide. Do so through parent-teacher conferences, phone calls, or emails. This allows not only time to discuss the questions, but also for the teacher or ARC members to review and research information for questions they might not have answers to right then. Federal law requires that states ensure that parents of students selected to be addressed assessed during an alternate assessment aligned with alternate academic achievement standards under the state's guidelines are informed that their child's achievement will be measured based on alternate academic achievement standards and how participation in such assessments may delay or otherwise affect the student from completing the requirements for a regular high school diploma. The ARC must explain the difference between an alternative high school diploma and a regular high school diploma to all members of the ARC. More information is available in the regular high school diploma versus alternative high school diploma module. As a parent or guardian, you need to make sure you understand diploma options and possible implications for a student receiving an alternative high school diploma. IDEA requires that ARCs provide a clear explanation of the differences between the assessments, diplomas, and how participation in alternate assessments may delay or otherwise affect the student from completing the requirements of a regular high school diploma. Having a significant cognitive disability may impact a student's diploma options. If unable to demonstrate proficiency in the course academic standards, the student will not earn credit toward a diploma. If unable to complete the required course of study, minimum 22 courses, the student will not earn credit toward a diploma. Or if the content is extensively modified compared to same-age peers, the student will not earn credit for the class. This is not to say they cannot earn a diploma, but to say that their significant cognitive disability may have a significant impact on them completing the requirements needed to obtain a regular high school diploma. IDEA requires that the ARC inform you, the parent or guardian, of any implications of not receiving a regular high school diploma and the implications resulting from receiving an alternate high school diploma. Some implications of receiving an alternative high school diploma include the possibility of not being able to apply for certain jobs that require high school diploma or general education development, GED. Many jobs and employers require at least a high school diploma or GED. The possibility of not being able to apply to trade schools, technical schools, and the majority of colleges and universities under their general student admissions. Students who earn an alternative diploma are eligible to apply to universities that have an approved Comprehensive Transition Program, or CTP, where they can apply for federal work-study Pell Grants and access their KEYS money. After reviewing all criteria for the participation guidelines, if the ARC agrees that the student is eligible for participation in the alternate assessment and that the student has a significant cognitive disability, the ARC should have documented each participation criterion discussion and decision in the IEP and/or conference summary and verified all supporting documentation used in making the decision. The ARC documents the ARC's decision for participation on the guidelines form. As the parent or guardian, you will need to provide your input on whether you agree the student is or is not eligible for alternate assessment. If a parent or guardian disagrees with the ARC decision, the ARC may schedule an additional meeting to further discuss and address the issue once it has further researched. The ARC needs to ensure they document the discussion and disagreeing opinions in the IEP and/or conference summary. The Director of Special Ed, or the DOS, may contact the parent or guardian in order to clarify the issues and may provide further explanations if needed. The ARC must provide the parent or guardian with prior written notice of the decision and their rights. The parent or guardian may dispute the decision via any of the dispute resolution options. Should the dispute continue after the district has provided the parent or guardian with prior written notice, the parent or guardian may dispute the decision via any of the dispute resolution options. These options include mediation, formal written complaints, and due process hearings. Information on each of these options can be found on KDE's website, located at Dispute Resolution Process page. The Learner Characteristics Inventory, or LCI, is a tool for ARCs to use to help complete the participation guidelines. The LCI contains a list of questions about your student's current level in different areas. The ARC answers the questions to assist in the discussion of the student's individual characteristics to determine what the student's current level is in areas such as reading, math, communication, and motor abilities. As the parent or guardian, you will need to provide input on the student's individual characteristics listed in the LCI. The ARC must address communication needs through a communication plan. A communication plan is not a specific type of document. It is just a collection of information from all ARC members to help determine what communication needs the student has and how to address them in all settings. That information is documented throughout the IEP. The IEP must verify that receptive and expressive communication is addressed in the IEP. The student must have a communication plan, or the student's IEP must document that communication is not an area of concern at this time, and which a communication plan would not be necessary. ARC members, specifically parents and guardians, should consider these questions when discussing the need for a communication plan. 1. How does the student communicate at home or in the community? 2. What is the best way for the student to communicate what he or she knows? ARCs develop the student's intervention based on communication assessment information. The family should be an integral part of this information provided. If the student is not using words, signs, device, or pictures to communicate, then seek information from the ARC on how to participate in the communication plan as a parent or guardian. Additional questions the ARC may want to consider to help you determine if your student would benefit from a communication plan include: 3. Does the student communicate verbally, nonverbally, or both? 4. What is the student's primary mode of communication? Speech, body language or gestures, sign language, pictures or tactical representation, device? And number 5, does the student demonstrate an understanding of what is said? If so, how do they demonstrate that to you? If you believe your student needs a communication plan, you can help by collecting video samples of the common forms of communication they use at home to share with their ARC. After the ARC has discussed and documented the participation guidelines, the decision will be made. All answers to participation criterion on the guidelines must be answered yes in order to be eligible to participate in alternate assessment. If any answer is no, the ARC may discuss the question again if needed, but the student does not meet eligibility to participate in the state alternate assessment if any of the criterion are answered no. As a parent or guardian, again, you will need to provide input on whether you agree or disagree that the student meets the eligibility requirements to participate in alternate assessment. This module was meant to describe who is eligible for alternate assessments, the participation guidelines that the ARC or IEP team must use and document to determine eligibility to participate, and the additional factors in the decision-making process, and how you as a parent or guardian can contribute to determining the best way for your student to participate on state assessments. If you have any additional questions about completing the alternate assessment participation guidelines, please contact Lauren Thinneman in the Office of Special Education and Early Learning in the Division of IDEA Monitoring and Results.